Welcome back to Database School. I'm your host, Aaron Francis, but more importantly, you're here to listen to the guests. Today, we're going to be talking about Postgres, which may or may not be how you're supposed to pronounce it, but we have the expert here with us. We've got Craig Kerstiens, and I think I pronounced that correctly. So, Craig, do you want to give yourself a little introduction and we can get started?
Sure. So I'm Craig. I work over at Crunchy Data. We're kind of all things Postgres. I've been around for a little over 10 years. I've been doing Postgres, for better or worse, for going on maybe north of 15 years now. Kind of stumbled into it, but had, early product at Heroku. It's actually kind of the black sheep early at Heroku. I came on board there to launch their Python support. So like everyone knows Heroku from the Ruby community, right? But came on board to actually kind of work on some of their other languages. Ended up doing a whole lot with Heroku Postgres. Helped them scale to, I think at the peak we were running like 1.5 million Postgres databases across all our customers.
Jeez.
So the idea of a 1 in a million problem was once a week, right?
Yeah.
Left there to go to Citus Data. Very different set of
Okay.
things. Instead of millions of customers, like our average customer was 40 terabytes.
Jeez.
The largest was 960 terabytes in a Postgres cluster. So not quite petabyte scale, but I'm going to round up. I'm going to cheat a little.
We can round up. Yeah, that's fine.
They were acquired by Microsoft, ran all Azure Postgres for a little while, and then was kind of ready to get back to small team building again. As I kind of joke, it's like unfinished business from my Heroku Postgres days of just making Postgres absolutely amazing for developers. But that's kind of a little bit of my history. Basically Postgres for a long time, but I don't come from a database background. Like I think you probably talk to a bunch of folks that are like, yeah, I spent 10 years at Oracle internals and, I contributed this feature and that feature to SQLite. I much more come at it from like a developer angle, and we'll probably get into some of that. But it's like
A man after my own heart. That is good. I like to hear that.
yeah, it's like I can, I've actually never committed a line of code to Postgres, and it'll probably stay that way. But it is a great database, and I'm definitely fond of it.
So I want to hear about the glory days of Heroku. I think I was just arguing with Dax on Twitter, as one does, about everybody's trying to rebuild Heroku, and I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Bring back good old Heroku. So when did you join them, and what was it like back then?
Right around acquisition time. So
Okay.
it was around pre-acquisition, was a full-time employee just after. I joined, I don't remember my exact number, maybe 22, 23 employee.
Oh wow.
It was still small then. Like the all hands meeting wasn't a meeting. Everyone just sat around the lunch table on Wednesdays and the founders
Yeah.
would talk some. And yeah, so it was an interesting time. Like now I kind of feel like I belong in tech. Like imposter syndrome's a thing, right? You're
Sure.
surrounded by smart people. I was reminiscing with a lot of us early Heroku folks, and we all felt like we didn't belong. And we're building something amazing and pushing each other. There's a lot of talk these days about, remote versus in office. And I don't think Heroku could have been created with that same culture remote. Like there's just feeding off each other in a room. Not to say you can't build great things, but it was a time and place. Us and GitHub were similar companies. We had some folks in those early days leave from Heroku, go to GitHub, and vice versa. Some of the early GitHub folks come over to Heroku. There was a lot of philosophies in there. At the core of it is how easy it is to deploy an app. And I think it's easier today, but there's still nothing that matches or beats Git push Heroku master.
Hey, we'll get back to the interview in just 1 second, but since you're here, you like databases, you probably like Postgres. Let me tell you about mastering Postgres. This is a course that I am teaching coming out October 15th. This is a way that you can master the most important part of your stack, your database. So go to masteringpostgres.com and sign up to hear when we release it. Okay, back to the interview. How is that possible? In the year of our Lord 2024, how is it possible that we've lost Git push Heroku master?
I think I chimed a little bit on that thread, and someone's like, but it's so easy to build a Docker file, and Rails gives you one by default. And I'm just like, cool, great. And then when you want to update it or muck with something and systems depend, like that's still all on you, right?
Yes. Yes.
And what if I need a database? What if I need a Redis? The Heroku marketplace was ahead of its time, but it's the right time, right? The first Heroku add-ons, Redis to go, Heroku built and then gave away to Redis to go to run.
Huh, I didn't know that. That's funny.
I think it was also the same with, I want to say it was maybe Zencoder. The first like video, transcript, like video encoding service. I think Heroku built the first one of that and gave it away to another company. Like Heroku didn't want to be everything.
Right.
But we wanted people to like best in class support these add-ons. So many of the early Heroku add-ons, Heroku built, and then we just gave away to a company and a friend that we knew to run them as full-on companies.
Just to start the extension or add-on flywheel turning
Pretty
a little
much.
bit.
Yeah. Like, I mean, we
didn't
had
know
people
that.
come and asking to like run Mongo and to run Redis, and eventually we caved on Redis. But like, we said no, it's just Postgres for a long, long, long time.
Mm-hmm. That is super interesting. I did not know that. That's some good lore right there. And then, am I understanding correctly that you either built or spearheaded the whole data clips thing?
So myself and the rest of the team, aside from one person, were anti-data clips.
Okay, tell us what data clips is / was, and then tell us that story as well.
So data clips inside Heroku was like one of the best features we ever built and used within Heroku Postgres. That internally we dogfooded so much and was one of the least adopted features of Heroku broadly. Like people just didn't use it. It's basically like a GitHub gist, but live against your database. So you write some SQL, you save it, and you get a unique URL, right? And you just send this around the internet. You can share it. You could secure it if you wanted with like SSO, but you could also have it, it's a unguessable URL that you can just go and like append.csv to, and it'll download a CSV. So internally, once we had this, we would build up just SQL, like just write SQL. That's live against the database. It'll auto refresh every hour. And then within Google Sheets, instead of rolling out like Metabase or Power BI or whatever BI reporting tool, in just Google Sheets, you can do like equal import data, open parentheses, quote, URL.csv, and it'll live load this.
Yep. So I love the import data in Google Sheets. You're speaking directly to me. Okay, so keep going.
So we ran the bulk of Heroku Business, like BI reports, for a long time, just on data clips against live production, a read replica of our production database, load these up in Google Sheets, create some charts on them, and boom. That was our like KPI board meeting, like every team, like where's our dashboard? We would sync, Zendesk tickets into a Heroku database via some Heroku scheduler, and then like let's chart how many critical tickets, and then what type of like all of just basically like crude like sync some data into Postgres and chart it. Now, where did it come from? One PM had this idea that it was like he wanted to like just write. He wanted this feature, right, and functionality, and the way you get buy-in at Heroku wasn't like PMs told people what to do or execs told people what to do. It was like you motivate someone that this is a good idea and you get people excited and they go build it. It was not a top-down, and it, if you thought something was interesting, you build a demo and show it off and you get people behind it, and that's how new products launch. I mean, Heroku's build pack stuff and the Citus stack was a couple of people hacking at a Tahoe offsite for a week on this is how it could work, showing it to the rest of the company, and light bulbs going off, right? So very much like best ideas win, and you get alignment behind them. He got no buy-in from the team. No one wanted to build this. Everyone thought it was a terrible idea. So he went and found some third-party consultants.
Except you.
I mean, at the time, no. It was I was just like, no, we like should be doing these other things for databases, and like it was Matt Saldo was the PM and pushed it, and I mean, we all had a mea culpa later. That was like, we were wrong on this one, the entire team, but he just found a third-party consultant to build this as a third-party SSO app. And then, man, detangling that and making it first-party was such a pain because it was a hack. But it wasn't a hack, but it was not built in the way we would have built it if we built it first-party. So that was, untangling that was fun. But yeah, at Crunchy, that was one of the first things that I'm like, all right, we're rebuilding this and we're rebuilding it better, and it's going to be like core and central to our product, because it's like once you have the data, writing SQL is easy to get the answer. And
Yes.
so many times in a live meeting, it's like, all right, I can write this query against a database and have an answer. And
Yes.
within Heroku Postgres, we always had a saying, like, if we've got data, let's use it. If all we've got our opinions, let's go with mine.
I like that. That's mine now. I'm gonna steal that.
We went to using data a lot, and it's like live in a meeting, like we'll move on from a topic, and 5 minutes later we'll circle back because like, oh, I've got the results of how many people like actually set up logging or like don't use HA or, I mean, as a database provider, I love to look at how many customers have a name of their database, like prod is in the name, and they don't have high availability enabled.
Mm-hmm. That's a pretty good target list of people to reach out to and get them to activate that. So I like, I think what resonates with me about all that is I like the central source of truth, and I like owning it. Like you were talking about Zendesk tickets and stuff. And once you start trying to tie all these sources together, I've always found that the easiest way to do that is use my programming language / framework and just put it in my database. And so like, that's the thing that I like, as we're building out these, learning platforms, I'm syncing all the data down to our database so that I can just look at stuff. And so that super resonates with me as like the developer. So like this guy paid somebody to build it, then y'all brought it in-house, and then you said it wasn't very widely adopted. Did Heroku users not use it that much, but the people that did loved it? Because I've heard about it I still use Heroku for one thing, but I used to use Heroku a lot, but I never used Postgres, and so I never used data clips. But I have heard it's got like a cult following of people that still love data clips, miss data clips. It sounds like you included. So what was the story like once y'all rolled it out in-house or the first party version of it? Did people use it?
I mean, yeah, I think it was like that cult following, but it was a really small cult, right?
Yeah.
It never caught on. It was never mass use. At one point in time, we had this idea of building Heroku Postgres was built as Postgres for Heroku users, but we never created like the Heroku experience for Postgres. Like the idea of git push Heroku master. We had a prototype one time of what if you ran git bisect on your database? Like, show me like when this data changed based on this query, right? Within the cloud, like we already have point in time recovery. We can just replay the write ahead log, see when data changes. If you want to know when, Aaron updated his email to be, Try Hard Studios, right? Like, okay, when did that happen? When did he change his account to that? For whatever reason, well, that we have all of that history in the wall, and we can just spin up multiple followers and slowly replay bit by bit by bit. Like, that's a magical
kind of cool
experience. It's fascinating. Back then, we had a lot of the stuff that exists in the current clouds of like, I want branching for my database. Like we actually had that supported at one point and no one used it. We were just like, there's no point. Postgres itself, way, way, way back, used to have time travel. Like people talk that used like Datomic, love the time travel functionality, and it's like no one used it in Postgres. Like they emailed out to the mailing list and it was crickets. So a lot of these things I think are fun and shiny, but not what purveyors of databases use all the time. Data clips is one of those things that like I'm shocked. I think it's because often like once a company gets to having like a BI team or an analytics team, they want to own their tools and not be kind of in the native stack usually.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So it falls in this real small sliver of companies that would use it. It's the people that are kind of like probably pretty early founder hacker types that want to go in, write raw SQL against, the database versus setting up Metabase, Tableau, some other BI tool once you get a big team.
You've got just as enough people where it's like, well, because you could connect your database and write SQL and, that's easy to do. But like, I need to share this with 3 people, right? And one of them's not technical and one of them is, so they want to see the SQL. So it's, but I found it fascinating once we started sharing it at Heroku that one of my favorite things was the marketing team would be like, hey, we need to know our monthly active users. And I'm like, okay, great. Here's the report for that. And they'd come back next month and be like, hey, I need this again. I'm like, okay, like, well, did I filter out we had like at one point like a Facebook app partnership. Like, did I filter those out last month or not? Like, I don't remember how I did that.
Oh, right.
Or they need like, hey, instead of last month, I need the last 2 weeks. And they see the data clip, which had the SQL in there, and they're like, hey, Craig, what happens if I type this and change this from 1 month to 2 week? Like, and suddenly we have marketing people like, hey, am I writing SQL now? Like, am I a developer? Which was
you got them hooked. You gave them a taste. There's no turning back now.
Fascinating, and I love that. I mean, the other thing I always started to do after that too was like make sure. Do you have a pSQL RC yourself set up or not?
No, I saw yours the other day and bookmarked it, but no.
Like, how many times have you written a query and then gone back like 6 months later? Like, what was that query? Where is it at? So you can easily set it up to save the history of every query you run with the database name that you're connected to.
Cool.
So it's like, core DB versus like marketing DB, right? Like, I don't want to mix and match those and like sorting through every query I've ever run. But it's like, once I'm connected to this DB, it's a pretty common set of queries that I run. So super handy to like auto save all of your query history.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense. So if you found the perfect tool, and everyone else was like, we're either too big or we're too small, but the people that were right there, they loved it. So after Heroku, I want to get to this tweet. I'll give a tease of the tweet, but I have one question before that. So here's the inciting incident. So I follow you on Twitter, obviously, and the tweet was you were talking to a VC, and he says, way back when we bet on MySQL, you said not crazy for that time, and then the VC says, Postgres really came out of nowhere in the last few years. Any thoughts on how that happened? And you said how much time you got. And so that is when I was like, I've got all the time in the world. So that's what I want to get to. But before we do that, you went to work for Citus. Is that right?
Yep.
So explain to me, as you know, but others may not, I'm coming out of predominantly a MySQL world historically. Explain to me similarities and differences to the extent that you know them between Citus and Vitesse.
I'd poke at it right away because like Citus has constraints and foreign keys, which I think Vitesse has kind of some support now.
Yeah.
I did love the blog post saying this is not possible and it should be a database, and I was just like, over here, we've had this for a few years.
I'm sure, yeah. No comment.
Citus generally was originally focused on way more like the HTAP space, like hybrid transactional processing, like ingest a lot of OLTP stuff, but then we want to do really fast, counts and aggregations, like fan out and like crazy parallelism.
Okay.
Citus, we stumbled into this idea of multi-tenant apps, right? Vitesse does different things with MySQL on how it shards. Like, I believe it's a little more magical, where Citus follows, I think, more of a Postgres view where, like, you're very explicit with how you shard with Citus. You say, this is my shard key, and you want to group, like, the right thing under the shard key, right? So, if you're Salesforce.com.
Pause there for 2 seconds. Give us a 1 or 2 sentence overview of what Citus, like, on the 10, what does Citus do?
Citus is an extension that turns Postgres into a sharded, distributed, horizontally scalable database.
Okay. So you've discovered this tenancy model, and you were about to say something about Salesforce. Carry on.
So, let's see. How quickly can I give the full primer? So, for those that haven't sharded, right? Like, a shard is I believe it comes from Ultima Online, I think.
I think that it comes from some game. I do think that's right.
Yeah. Is a way of dividing up your database, right? You've got, like, database 1, database 2, database 3. Like, poor man sharding that I've seen in a bunch of apps is, hey, users 1 through 100 go in this database. Users 101 through 200 go in this database. Within sharding, you've got, like, nodes, like physical nodes, like node 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you've got shards, when you're sharding, you want to have more shards than you have nodes. So if I've got like 4 nodes, I maybe want to create 32 shards up front. The reason is it's easy to go and move a shard after the fact. It's not easier to split a shard up. So if I would have like a, table 1, table 5, table 9 live on node 1 inside my Postgres instance. And if I'm Salesforce.com, instead of going users 1 through 100, which are going to be my oldest, biggest, most valuable as time goes on, all packed in together, right. I'm going to say, well, customer 1 going on shard 1 on node 1. Customer 2 going on node 2, shard 2, right? Customer 3, so forth, so on, right? And I'm going to get back here to customer 5 going back on node 1. But then I can later go and say, oh, I want to move customer 5 out to their own node. So I can create a new Postgres instance, and then with, logical replication, or we had this way, way, way back. I think I have a blog post maybe 12 years ago of, I think the company was Think Through Math, a big Heroku customer that used Heroku followers and basically spin up a follower, promoted one, and then you're going to go and delete half the data from one and then delete half the data from the old primary. And now you just split it up, right? It works pretty well. So Citus, if you have something like a customer ID, right? Well, you're not joining across databases. And that's where you get nice foreign key constraints and all that, because customer ID goes on every single table. Citus is... I don't know why I was thinking about this in the shower this morning. I think, I was talking with someone about Citus yesterday.
We share an affliction. I have that same problem, so you're not alone there.
It's a weird analogy, but Citus is kind of like chemotherapy. Like, okay, if you have cancer and you catch it early, pretty effective. It works, right? You're just now building an app. And if you have cancer, right? If you don't have cancer, you're not going in there being like, hey, I'm about to go out and get sunburnt. Can I go ahead and get some chemo preemptively?
Okay, fair enough. Good so far.
You catch it late stage, right? You're a 10 terabyte database. You have, crazy weird joins. Yep. You don't have your customer ID on every table. You've got complicated weird queries that don't join on customer ID. Maybe the chemo's going to work, but if it's late stage cancer, you're going through a lot of pain for an unclear outcome, right?
So if you end up at a point where sharding makes sense, but your data model is not already tuned for that, you're going to be
workload.
Okay, and query workload, you're going to be kind of up a creek. And so at some point before that, you got to start doing the legwork to clean up your data model and queries such that then you can introduce sharding without the pain.
Yep. And Citus has come a long way to kind of test if your app's ready, right? They've got a mode where it's you can warn on queries and that sort of
that's cool.
It's gotten better and better on that. But I would say on average, people spent, when they showed up with a big mature app, it was 4 to 6 months to kind of a few engineers re-architecting their app to kind of, their data model. And you've got at that point, you've already got a big database. The idea of we're going to go and backfill our customer ID on every table, that, once you've done Rails new, that's pretty quick and easy. On a Rails app with 150 models, not so quick and easy to not impact production. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. All right, I was wondering where that analogy was going to go, but I think it works, so that makes sense. I'll accept that. So let's talk about we can close out by talking about Crunchy, because you'll have a lot of interesting stuff going on over there. But here's what I want to ask you: you're telling this VC. So this VC, I don't know if it's real or made up, but it's a great story. The VC is saying, "Where did Postgres come from? Seems like it came out of nowhere." You seem to have a lot of opinions on that, which I want to hear. My perspective is I grew up in a MySQL household. My dad was actually SQL Server, but I was a PHP boy, still am. And so we were always LAMP stack, MAMP stack, MySQL, PHP. So that was kind of my long history. And then It does, in my opinion, seem like Postgres kind of came out of nowhere. In our world, it does feel like Laravel, which is a PHP framework, has always kind of been MySQL, and Rails has always kind of been Postgres. But I will say, Laravel Cloud is launching, and the first database flavor that they're going with is Postgres. And so it does kind of feel like the tides are turning a little bit, and I'm sure that you follow Mark Callahan on Twitter, and I think he's like I think he is a pure and noble saint. He seems totally driven by data only, and he seems very thorough. So I don't think he has a dog in any fight, but every time he tweets about the new MySQL releases, it's like, hey, another regression. Hey, another performance regression. Hey, and it's like, what is going on over there? And so from kind of like my perspective, that is what I'm seeing in terms of like the battle or the war or whatever. So sounds like me and this either real or fictional VC are on the same page. What is your take on why Postgres came out of nowhere, 20 years later? But what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think there's a few things in there. And so I'll back up and cover a few things, right? And so
Please.
before Heroku, Heroku wasn't my first foray into Postgres. So I was at a company back in 06, 07, 08, Truviso, that extended Postgres to be a streaming database to essentially do map reduce on data as it came in. So this was back in the data world, like the CEP, complex event processing space. Postgres wasn't new to the database world.
Okay.
Postgres, right, is post-ingress. Databases follow one of two lineages, right? And ingress is half of the databases out there. I forget, I don't think SQL, maybe actually, no, SQL Server is not. But if you look like DB2, Sybase, but if you look Redshift, right? Redshift was par excel. Amazon licensed par excel. Par excel ran out of money, and they hired all of the par excel engineers, right? So Amazon never acquired par excel, but it was purely par excel technology, right? If you look back at Greenplum, Astrodata, Netezza, all of these data warehousing products.
I've never heard of any of these things. You claim you're some application developer, you don't do a lot of it. You're the expert. I've never heard of any of these things in my life.
So Postgres has been around for a long time. Because of its permissive license, because of its amazing code quality, if you're hacking databases as a PhD student, you start with Postgres and then you modify it.
Interesting.
If you're building a data warehouse 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, what you would do with Postgres is you would fork it, because that's just what you did back then, right? It's super permissive license. It's fine to do. Fork it, turn it into an MPP database, like massively parallel processing, and then start building out, your data warehouse. And 3 or 4 years later, you start to have something that just about works. Building a data warehouse is a long, slow process. So fast forward a little bit, right? And Postgres, maintaining and keeping current, Redshift is kind of stuck on Postgres. I believe it's 8.2 is the version. Now, there's hints of things that have come in, window functions in Postgres arrived, I believe, in Postgres 8.4. When I first found window functions, I was just like, man, I can do all of this in SQL and not have to go back and forth to my programming. This is an interesting real database. So I give some of that context of if you look way back at product companies and acquisition, real legit data warehouses that were now kind of resemble Postgres, but they really truly started at Postgres. If you talk to others today, like a Yugabyte or Cockroach, they're like, oh, we're Postgres. But it's we started with the parser or the wire protocol. That's not starting with the Postgres code base. You started with a completely different code base. Back then, you actually started with Postgres. Now, at Truviso, when Postgres, we went from Postgres 8.4 to 9.0, it took us 6 months to go from one version to just rebase all of that. So fast forward a little bit and you've got extensions, right? Which make it even more fascinating for Postgres to build on. Maybe I'll come back to that piece. But so I showed up at Heroku and I was over here launching Python. Like, I ran product for our payments and billing group, did some stuff with the add-ons marketplace, and I'm over here, and here's all these Rails developers, like, throwing just, like, text stuff into a field, and like, oh, we'll convert timestamps back and forth. I'm like, why aren't you using timestamp TZ? Why aren't you using range types? Why aren't you, I'm like, Heroku is supposed to be really, really good Rails developers, right? Like, really savvy. And like, guys, why are you treating, I think DHH once famously said, like, the database is just a dumb hash in the sky. And like, no, it's like, this is the source of truth. Like, how are you... Man. I knew the Python community and the Django community really well. And they're like, we're going to treat all databases the same. And I'm like, you're kidding me. Like, at one point, SQLite listed null as a data type. And I'm like, I'm very confused by this. I think it was just a misconfusion in the docs, but I'm just like, you've got 5 data types. And you know SQLite well, right? Like, 5 data types, or is there more now?
Oh, no, it's still that few. Yeah.
And if you've ever built like a scheduling app, right? If you're building like a scheduling app and calendaring app, you don't want overlapping, like, hey, we want 30 people in a class and we don't want to, overflow that. And like, it's college registration time and everyone wants not to have the 8 a.m. class, right? So they flood to the noon class. Like, don't you want a proper constraint of the database to ensure that doesn't happen and you unwind it? And like, Postgres has constraint for that, right? Like, why aren't you using these things? Every developer I've ever met that says, no, I enforce constraints at the application layer. When I'm like, cool, can I have 5 minutes with your database and just run a few queries and see what happens? Every time they're like, can you tell me which of those is correct? I'm like, why won't you believe me when I like find duplicate or incorrect data? So at Heroku, I was just evangelizing Postgres internally. I'm like, hey, dumb Rails developers, you should really learn how to use a database. Here's all the amazing stuff it can do, right? And I accidentally got recruited over there. But I think Heroku had a massive piece, right? Like, every Rails developer got a Postgres database. And we made it easy to use. And we started pushing on it becoming great for Rails developers. Like, Rails, you can pass in like a DSN, like the Postgres URL, like Postgres : / Like, we worked to get that into a standard within Postgres, like that the libpq driver would parse that. So it's the Postgres driver that's parsing it. And now you can just pass that in. You don't have to break out username, password, hostname, all that, which is just ugly and painful. And so worked with like the Rails community and then pushed on that in the Python community. Like, you should just accept a Postgres connection string as the thing to connect. We really just worked to make it amazing, both with the language communities and within the Postgres itself, and try to get them to meet both ways.
So pause there. Was Heroku supporting Postgres only? Was that a big reason it was adopted in Rails?
Yeah, it was. Heroku was synonymous with Rails. And Heroku, it was funny because Heroku, we had one guy on the ops team that's like, hey, MySQL versus Postgres, which should we use? This person was not a major contributor to anything else at Heroku, except he's like, in all of the like Linux, Unix forums I'm on, like, Postgres seems to have a really good security track record and be safe for your data. And I think if we're running a database, it should not lose your data. It's like, okay, that's a pretty... There was a little more thought than that behind it, but not massively. Like, it was a little bit of like, this seems like it's got a good track record. Let's go with it.
That is wild, because I so closely associate the Rails community with Postgres, and Rails with Heroku, and Heroku with Postgres. But I didn't know, chicken or egg. I didn't realize that Heroku having Postgres only and being the spot for Rails is how Rails and Postgres ended up thick as thieves. I did not know that.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I still had it. I don't think I saved it from the work email. Like, we have an email from Amazon years later that Amazon never wanted to support Postgres. like if MySQL RDS had existed, we probably would just scrap that. Like, Heroku Postgres, like, we had all these Rails developers asking for a database and thought, how hard could this be? And like if RDS was there, we probably just said like, all right, let's wrap this or let's use it. It didn't exist, so we built Heroku Postgres. Amazon, about the same time or shortly after, happened to come out with MySQL RDS. And then years later, the GM of that group was like, we got tired of all the complaints about us not supporting Postgres. Like, you're the reason we went and supported Postgres on RDS. Like, there was no plans for that. They were all in on MySQL. And they got tired of the complaints about, like, we want this Heroku thing over here. We like Postgres. Can you support it? Heroku supports it. Why don't you? That was I mean, you can thank Heroku a lot. I think there's a few pieces, but, like, Heroku definitely had some track record behind it.
This is great lore. I freaking love this. Okay, so you touched for a second on the extensions. My point of view / opinion is that it's kind of like this is not derogatory. Postgres is kind of like React. You cannot leave because the community, the ecosystem is so incredibly strong. And, I think it's like a meme on Twitter at this point. It's just like, just use Postgres for that. Oh, you have a problem? Just use Postgres for that. Because truly, it does seem like there is an extension for everything. So how did that, like, what was the inciting incident to allow that ecosystem to flourish?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been there for a while, and if you read back to like Stonebreaker's original thesis, and a big idea was extensibility. It wasn't quite, I think, the extension framework that exists today. Twice over a colleague or just once, like Dimitri Fontaine, like extensions are always there, but not as easy to use. He went and added
right here, Dimitri Fontaine. It's a good one. So, I got lots of notes out of that one.
Yeah. Oh man. I need to go have some wine with Dimitri. He's very French, so
he's a good writer.
Yeah, I can tell you off camera plenty of stories about Dimitri too, that are not in the appendix of the book. Yeah, so he wrote the create extension command, right? Mm-hmm. So extensions were there, but it had to be loaded weird and weren't as user friendly. We actually contracted out with him at one point at Heroku. We had the idea of building an extension marketplace for Postgres.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And so, right, this is 12 years ago we're thinking about this. So you see people kind of trying this now. He was like, well, can I build the server side of it in anything? And at Heroku at the time, we had everything. We had Go, we had Java. I don't know if it was Java or Scala in the stack. We had Python. We had Ruby. Like we were fully polyglot everything. It got cleaned up later and standardized, but we were everything. And so we're like, sure, write in whatever you want. Learned my lesson. He came back with this all written in Common Lisp, and yeah, we that never made it to production.
What a legend.
That's in my the back pocket. Like one day I'm going to ship an extension marketplace, but like that framework of create extension, right? You still got to build them and have them on the server. Mm-hmm. But I would say even before that, Postgres was more and more of a data platform. Like you had things like full text search, right? You started to have PostGIS, which was an extension, but like it shipped right alongside, right? Mm-hmm. You had things like HStore, JSON-B. We almost wound up with something very different where we had like a completely different approach, which was JStore. Like it was a different competing thing at the time. Man, Postgres developers are fascinating. Like I think now they're more tuned into general web world, but at the time, one's like, what is JSON? Why would I care? I built a website once. It was a good website. It was HTML. This wasn't 20 years ago. This was 10 years ago, mm-hmm. right? And we're like, hang on, no. Here's why JSON matters in the world. Mm-hmm. And so when it got JSON, the JSON support in Postgres, well, not 9.2. 9.2 was cheating, right? That was JSON into a text field. That was validation on it. JSON-B, which my colleague Will says stands for better.
We do love Will.
It's so good. Other Will. You need to know Other Will.
Oh, okay. I don't know Other Will. I'm sure he's great. I love main Will, primary Will.
Shout out to Other Will, who is a webmaster. You can visit his website, Bitfission. It's an amazing website. If you're there, make sure to sign the guest book.
Not a lot of webmasters around anymore. I think him and maybe Justin Jackson are the only two webmasters left.
He's been our webmaster. He was webmaster at Heroku and at Citus and here at Crunchy too. So
okay, we'll call him Webmaster Will because Other Will's it's a little derogatory. So Webmaster Will and Will King. So JSON B is JSON better according to Webmaster Will.
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at it, like the idea of like, oh, you need a NoSQL database. Oh, you need full text search. Oh, you need like Postgres has been a platform for a while. I think I started saying that in something like 2012. They're like, it's a data platform. But then you enter extensions, right? Which I don't know of any other database that, well, now DuckDB has extensions, right? But like outside of that, I don't know of another one. And I think you see, I caught up with Hannes a month or two ago, like a lot of like DuckDB stuff is modeled after Postgres. It's like, man, there's some good stuff in here. I think they're doing a lot on developer experience and improving that. But, hey, Postgres has had this for a while. It's just not been accessible and developer friendly. And so low-level hooks that can turn Postgres into whatever. One person joked and wrote a Mongo Mongo compatibility FDW, which just wrote your data to dev null. Because you can do that. You can change where the data goes and whether it gets synced or the query planner, all that sort of thing. So I think as much as Postgres continues to move forward and be steady and advance bit by bit by bit, it's the releases are getting more and more boring because it's like, well, we're faster, we're still safe for your data,
yes,
and if something gets really really standardized and stops changing, we'll add it. Otherwise, you've got this huge extension ecosystem that like go do crazy stuff until it kind of becomes a standard and that sort of thing.
So is that how informally is that how you think it works, that the extensions are proving grounds, and once something reaches some sort of critical mass or whatever, the team kind of like looks at rolling it in? Is that how it's worked historically?
Sort of with some functionality. Like there was some extension stuff around like JSON path that then became first class operators, right? Bits and pieces. Some stuff you'll never find in core. I doubt you find Citus, like sharded distributed stuff in core. I doubt you find columnar or time series in core. So I think there will always be a world for extensions. Like Postgres itself ships with, I want to say it's 17 extensions in contrib. Like it already ships with some. UUID was one for a while, right? Now I think it's going to get a more standard UUID type. So as these things standardize, I don't think contrib's going to grow. It was an interesting idea. I think it's 5 years away, but in 5 years, I think we kind of figure out a full-on marketplace for extensions. Now, how that works within the community versus vendors versus other is interesting, but I think we get there eventually.
That's super interesting. The idea of an extension marketplace for a database is very novel to me. I'm sure many have thought of it, but I have never thought of that. So how does Postgres win the hearts and minds of so many people? Because what I feel like is I do feel like the Postgres diehards are diehard. And so we get a little bit of understanding from the Heroku story about how it was like introduced and spread into perhaps the Rails community and then further, because Heroku supports all kinds of languages. But what is it these days that makes the advocates advocate? Is it the lack of ownership by Oracle? Is it the extensions? Is it the stability? Like what are you seeing in your line of work where it's like this is why people love it?
On the advocate side, it's probably a mix of all those, right? I think, but I mean, to be super honest, like I think developers were bad at like rational decision making. Like we're like, Rails is so much better than Python and Django. And here's why. And I'm like, Ruby and Python are the same language.
Yeah.
They're like, yes, there are differences. And now I'm going to get roasted in the comments. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, you said it, not me. But don't come at me, guys.
I was at a conference like, it was about 10 years ago and speaking at the speaker's dinner. And someone was commenting like, yeah, we're just all like, we just cargo cult and jump on the bandwagon, and we defend our things like we were so thought out and formed our own opinions. And it's like, someone else just said it and I follow along. Like, for example, like Postgres. Like, as a Django developer, I know I use Postgres, but I can't tell you why. And half the table got quiet because I was down at the end, right? And I was just like, concurrent index creation, transactional DDL, window function. I was just like, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And it was just like, oh, that's really cool. It is a really good database, right? So I think when you find someone that digs in, right, that prints out the manual is it 2,000 pages and reads it, have you read the full manual yet?
I've only printed 500 pages. I have it right here, but I did not print, I didn't print a lot of the stuff. It's a lot of docs, man.
In the early days, several of the Heroku team members all printed out and read it cover to cover. As we were like, we need to know this as good as anyone if we're running a database as a service.
Thank you.
So,
finally, somebody that agrees with me. I love that.
I said they did. I did. I was not in support of
well,
that. I was like,
pass along my regards to your former coworkers and tell them that I think they're very, very smart. Yes, I think that's a great idea, especially if you're going to be running it as a service. I'm just trying to teach it. So I print it out and read it, but like-minded folks.
But yeah, it is a good database, right? I do think, Oracle and what they've done with MySQL doesn't hurt it, right? I do think an incredibly permissive license that you can take it and go and build on top of it doesn't hurt it. I think as you look at frameworks that now take advantage of the features that didn't for a long time, right? Every database was just a dumb database with text and timestamps and, integers and decimals. And why do we need more data types, right? Like, because you may want to migrate from at one point to another. Like, have you ever migrated a database? Like, if you have that philosophy about your database, why don't you have your philosophy about your app code? Like, we can't use anything unique to Laravel because it might not exist in Rails. Because we might need to migrate to Rails. Like, I've never heard that argument made.
Yeah.
But I hear it made about a database all the time. We can't use unique MySQL features because we might migrate to Postgres. Or we can't use unique... Well, why, then make the same argument to your framework and to your primary programming language. Yeah. And so I do think that the real diehards appreciate, some things like transactional DDL is still so nice. Like, you run a migration and it fails midway, what happens? And it's like, that doesn't happen every day, but man, when that does happen, it's not a fun time.
No.
And so Postgres being safe and reliable, like, as a data person, it's near and dear to my heart. Now, I think the rest of the programming world, like, we do cargo cult, and because it's the cool thing and you're not wrong for choosing Postgres, that's where it gets the bulk of its love. But the diehards, I think, have real reasons. Like, it's licensing, no central owner. To me, it's not just open source. It's no central owner. That's, like, find another thing outside of maybe the Linux kernel that is run in a similar way.
Yeah, that's interesting. The no central owner. Yeah, I guess SQLite still super controlled by DRH and I think his two friends, which is why libsql was forked because they don't allow pull requests. Laravel has a corporation. Rails has a foundation, I guess.
And even then, like,
pretty
with the
DHH
foundation,
heavy.
Yeah, exactly. Even in the I don't know if it's in the core bylaws or not. Like, no one company can comprise more than 50% of the core board of Postgres. I mean, you look at the distribution of commits from and it's an oddity. People are like, oh, the core team, that's the people that commit stuff. It's like, no, core is more of like a steering body of 7 or 9 people that controls the trademark and defends it and, code of conduct and just making sure things are okay. Committers are the ones that do all the work, right? And that's 50, 60 people. And if you look at that, the distribution of companies, I don't know that any company has more than 10 committers. And I don't even think I think Microsoft was really high at one point at 6 or 7. I don't think they're that high anymore. But it's really spread out in kind of a crazy way. And that no central ownership is a fascinating thing beyond just the open source part.
Yeah, that is kind of wild. I don't know if I knew that about Postgres, but I certainly haven't thought about it in terms of other projects in the open source world. And I will have to noodle on that because that is very interesting. And I think you're right. I think it's unique.
It's crazy. Yeah, when you pause and you're like, oh yeah, this open source database and that open source, and it's driven by a company, right? Part of it
right.
is it's hard to build a database, right? And
yeah.
I don't think it can be recreated in this day and age. Like getting 10 different developers to agree and just work together like in an open source fashion without a financial backing behind it sounds crazy.
Sounds hard. Sounds real hard. I want to close with two things. One, I'm going to spring on you because you mentioned it. And then I want to talk about Citus and all its offerings. What do you know about DuckDB? It seems so cool. And I know so little about it, but it seems spiritually similar to SQLite for obvious reasons. So what do you know about DuckDB? What are they doing? What do you like about it? Just tell me your thoughts on DuckDB.
Yeah, to me it's fascinating, and I think that the general space of database is fascinating right now. Like if you dove into databases and started podcasting about them 10 years ago, you'd have like Will King level viewership on his personal YouTube channel. I can't wait till he watches the entire episode.
Shots fired. Will King catching strays over there. Sorry about that, buddy.
Databases aren't sexy, right? And yet they're almost becoming sexy now. Is that kind of a thing? DuckDB, I think the creator Hannes really appreciates the idea of applying developer experience to database, which is not a thing I've ever heard anyone talk about. I think SQLite is it's a great local developer database. You kind of don't need it as a server hosted database generally, right? It's the vectorized execution, doing deep database engineering. The vectorized stuff is fascinating. And when I say vectors, I don't mean AI, database vector execution. PostGIS has had vectors in it for years and years and years. What they're doing is different and interesting. But the general developer experience side of it to me is fascinating. I actually think it'll be around for years and years and years and years to come based on that. But I've also been in the database world to know every database you go and look at today that you evaluate, there's a really good chance they're not around in 10 years. And I say that having mentioned Astrodata and Netezza and Greenplum.
Yeah, all those that I've never heard of.
That were the hot thing 15 years ago, right? That's how could this not be the next Oracle and a $10 billion company? And yet, where are they now, right? It's hard to build databases. It's hard to build a company around them. DuckDB is fascinating because developer experience and and databases don't normally go together in the same sentence.
Well, I always joke that
Postgres. I always joke Postgres is the least bad database. Databases aren't good. They're not fun and friendly. It's not yay, I get to work with my database today. You may say that, but I think most of us...
Yeah, speak for yourself, honestly.
But most folks, it's hey, Postgres works, it's reliable, it's safe. I think people do feel that way about DuckDB, which is great for it.
Yeah, I've been watching them because of my forays into SQLite with Terso, and I think the Terso folks are friendly with the DuckDB people, and they're I think they're maybe at Small Data SF right now or last week or something, and it just seems so cool. I just watch all the stuff they're doing on Twitter, and I'm I want to do that, but who has the time? But someday I'm going to dive into DuckDB for real and learn everything there is to know about it because I do think it's fun. I think it's a lot of fun. All right. Here's where I want to wrap it. Tell me, you work at Crunchy Data. Crunchy Data, it seems like they've got 10 things going on. So tell me all the Crunchy Bridge for all these different platforms and what exactly does Crunchy do?
Postgres.
Go on.
Anywhere you want it, anyway. We have Fortune 500 companies, large banks and healthcare companies that rely on us for on-premise Postgres, right?
Okay.
They're
there you go.
Hey, we've heard about this Postgres thing. We want to do open source. Can you help us? We have, I don't know, $100 million to spend in Oracle, and we're trying to, check out this open source thing. Can you tell it?
Wild.
We live in a different world, right? Enterprises move differently.
Right.
So we have, hey, everything you need to run production Postgres. And while Postgres is great, when as an enterprise, you're like, all right, we're going to evaluate monitoring. Okay, there's 5 products, right? And we're an enterprise, so we're gonna do a bake-off and do a 6-week trial of every monitoring tool. And now we're gonna do a 6-month trial of every backup tool and every DR tool and every HR tool. And we finally evaluated, 20 tools. And we found we like, A, Q, and T, and S. S doesn't work with A. Crap, we've got to go back and reevaluate now. Like, do we want to get rid of A, or do we want to get rid of, so basically, kind of like Red Hat was to Linux, right? Like curated, for the enterprises, right? Curated Postgres distribution. So that's kind of where we started. Like,
interesting. Okay.
It's like, you're an enterprise, you want production Postgres, we've got you covered. We've got one of the oldest Kubernetes operators, stateful operators, right? So way back in the early days, we got to know CoreOS on this operator pattern thing, built a stateful operator for Postgres. Back when everyone's like, no, you can't do database in Kubernetes. You can't do databases in containers. Like, that was the Wild West. You shouldn't be doing this. We did it, and we did it well and safely. I think it's coming up on almost 6 years old now as like a stateful Kubernetes operator. I came on board about 4 years ago to build out Crunchy Bridge, and as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's like unfinished business with Postgres. Like, I want developers. A database is kind of like your bank. It should just be like when your bank sends you a letter, it's probably because you get free Social Security protection for a year because they had a data breach, right? Like, you don't want to hear from me. You want to build your app. You want me to fade away into the background, right? So how can I give you everything you need out of the box? Like, our $10 a month plan runs in an isolated VPC, support for BPC peering, SSO, like there's no SSO tax, encryption at rest, encryption at transit, point-in-time recovery, like with our equivalent of data clips for like $10 a month for a true production grade database, right?
And are you orchestrating that within my, for example, AWS account, or are you hosting that on your own?
So it's in our own, but it's in an entirely isolated VPC. So every customer, like, we run completely isolated data planes. So a centralized control plane for all the provisioning, monitoring, all that. But every customer's data is completely isolated.
Got it. Okay.
And I mean, a lot of it's just, hey, how can we make this so simple, right? Like, when your disk starts to get full, we alert you, and then auto add, scale it up and add size to it, right? We've had a ton of folks migrate from Heroku or from RDS or wherever, and like for the exact same hardware, we've seen up to a 3 to 5x performance boost. Often it's 10, 20, 30%. I was kind of shocked at the 3 to 5x. It turns out like running Postgres really well is a valuable thing. And then we recently actually started to get into kind of expand beyond just standard Postgres and moving more to like the data warehousing space. So there we've embedded DuckDB under the covers, and we've got Postgres that talks to DuckDB natively, and DuckDB that knows how to like respond Postgres. So things like map data types and structs and geospatial functions, and we like natively operate on Iceberg inside, like you just connect to Postgres and then you can query like an Iceberg table just like that. Are you familiar with Iceberg or not?
I have no idea what Iceberg is.
You familiar with Parquet?
Yeah, barely.
So Parquet is like a columnar compressed like file, right? If you have like 100 million records and like, think of it as a fancy CSV with like data types that are in the columnar compressed format, right? Okay. Iceberg came out of Netflix, but is like I think it's an Apache Foundation like file type. That is Parquet++. So if you've got a 100 million record file that you write out one time, right? Yeah. Well, if you've got 100 new records that you got like suddenly like, well, we got 100 users, we've got to delete from this file. With Parquet, you've got to write out a new file. Iceberg has this like metadata that has a repository that points to, oh, here's this like 100,000 file, and then here's this change set, here's this change set, here's this change set. So you don't have to go write out a whole new set. It's like Parquet++. Snowflake, Databricks, ClickHouse, all are generally starting to support Iceberg now. It's like the future of like in that data lake space. So it's fascinating. But the thing is, for us, like, you're using Postgres. You love Postgres. You don't have to think about Iceberg. You don't have to know about it, right? If you want to say, I want to just archive my data into S3 in the compressed columnar format, just continue to work with Postgres. we do all that heavy lifting for you. So that's our biggest last push. Like I managed to recruit the like Citus lead architect, Citus lead engineer to start building like the world's expert on Postgres extensions, and I don't say that lightly. To like, let's go do crazy data warehousing things with Postgres and kind of take it to where it's never been.
Cool.
But basically, if you want someone to help you run Postgres or manage Postgres for you, the short is we do it really well, and you don't need to be a Postgres expert. I gave up on trying to teach people like Postgres and that they should learn SQL. I appreciate your campaign so much because I'm just like, man, these developers like they just want to write in active record, and it's man, the queries that come out of it are rough. SQL's not a good language; it's a powerful one. It's not a good language; it's a powerful one.
Well, I'm doing what I can to turn the tides there. I want. I come from a it sounds like very similar place as you, is like from the developer's point of view, and my goal is to hopefully empower developers to know and like and be proficient in SQL and these different databases. And then if you want to use Active Record, that's fine. But at least now you understand what's happening and you can spot a terrible Active Record query whenever you see it versus just like, I just use Active Record or Eloquent or whatever. I want you to be like an expert user of an ORM should you decide to use an ORM. That's my goal.
I just don't want you to be afraid of your database. Like that's why we built and launched like the Postgres playground. Like I don't know if you poked it.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's like this is Postgres running in your web browser, but now it's like guided tutorials where we like bootstrap like the database with some example. Like we'll go run some queries ahead of time in your browser against it, so that you have like stats in your database in the browser, and you don't have to worry about like what happens if I run this command. It's in your browser. Refresh. Yep. Data's back. Like the idea that how do we let you work with Postgres and get more comfortable with it so you're not scared of your database?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that in-browser playground is cool. I've absolutely played around with that. Y'all also have a great blog. I have some of them printed out around here. But y'all have a great blog with lots of contributors over at Crunchy. It's very impressive. Okay, well, thank you for being so generous with your time. Is there anything else that we didn't cover? Where can people find you to learn more, to follow along?
I think you mentioned, the Crunchy Data blog and newsletter. It's spend a lot of time there. I'm pretty easy to find. If you can kind of spell my last name, Craig Kerstiens on, find me. I'm pretty easy to find on the internet. And by all means, like drop me notes, DMs, emails. I'm generally happy to help if I can. Like it's been a fun tech ride. I'm not done yet. I'm not washed up and retiring tomorrow, but it's been a fun tech ride. And so like very happy to try to, connect with folks and give back, wherever I can.
Well, this is one way that you have done so. I super appreciate it. Thank you for doing this, and we will talk soon.
Yeah, thanks so much.
See ya.